Annie Longmore, welcome to Over the Bonnet.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me.
You often work behind the scenes for Over the Bonnet, so you know a lot of what goes on. I want to talk to you about, firstly, your childhood was fairly involved, lots of brothers and sisters. Tell us about that.
I was one of 7 children. Grew up in Tasmania, born in Tassie, spent a little bit of time in South Australia as a toddler, but most of my life, a young adult life, up to about the age of 20-something, 25, was in Hobart. We were this bunch of naughty kids who travelled the neighbourhood causing trouble, and just, we used to do things like, I remember the new highway was put through. My brother and I were always trying to find out ways to make a bit of money, pocket money, and they planted a whole lot of pig face along the highway. So we went and dug it all up and sold it around the neighbourhood for like 10 cents a plant or something, and we were very...
budding entrepreneurs.
Oh, absolutely. Always. Yeah. But it was good fun living in a big family. We played well together. We all got on fairly well together.
There's always fights with brothers and sisters.
Yeah. Yeah. My brother and I were really, really close. We hung out together right up until we were teenagers. Didn't have quite so much to do with my older sister until we had to share a room together once, and we became very good friends just because we were sharing for about 6 months or so. My younger ones I looked after more than played with, but we did have a great game of shadows around the house where we'd go outside and hide in bushes, and you had to kind of walk around the house without being followed. And when you heard someone coming, you had to hide. So we imagine 7 children going around the house, creeping in and out of bushes and jumping out on each other. And there was a lot of fun when we were little, yeah.
It sounded like a fairly magical way to grow up.
I absolutely loved my childhood. It was safe, reasonably safe anyway. We didn't have the problems I think kids have now where they can't do this unsupervised. They can't do this without a telephone. They have to be checked on all the time. It's a dangerous world now. And when I grew up, it was a much, much safer place to be. So we could make our fun. We could go out after dark. We could run around the neighbourhood unchecked, and not feel in any particular danger.
I think it was the generation, though.
Absolutely, absolutely. I wouldn't have let my daughter do the things that my brother and I used to do. I was much more careful. I watched her more closely than we were watched as children.
What do you put that down to with the change in attitude and the way you can't let your kids run wild as such anymore?
I just think there's too much bad stuff out there now, and I don't know where it comes from. I think a lot of it is probably populated by that access to the wrong sort of media and people just generally not caring as much as they used to care. I just think it's a nastier place now, unfortunately, for a lot of people, which is why I love living in the country, because I see stuff in the city, I think, oh, I'd hate to live here now. So yes, you just don't have that peace and that calm. Even things like cars now driving much faster, it's so much traffic. You can't let your kids out near the road because you just don't know what's going to happen. So
7 siblings. Tell us about your parents.
Mum was just the typical housewife. Looking after the kids, I think she was an amazingly strong person in a lot of ways. I know she had times where she didn't necessarily know how to deal with things. I've saw her on the floor crying a few times. She always seemed to be under a pile of ironing or in the kitchen cooking up a storm. Dad was a minister of religion with the Presbyterian Church, so he was a very, very busy man, up very early in the morning, gone a lot. He was also in the army, so he was on camps and things. So he was someone who... I loved my dad to death, but I wished I'd had more of him at things like sports events, and when I was growing up going to school. He often wasn't there because he couldn't be there. So I missed him. He didn't see me do my first play. He didn't see me on stage when I was doing theatre. He was always there for everybody and anybody who needed somebody. And if I really had problems, I could go to him and talk to him. He was a very fair man. But I missed him a lot too.
Was it like a mechanic's car if he was available for everyone, but home didn't get looked after quite the same way?
No, I don't think it did. I don't think it did, in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways it did, because he did everything for his family. But we did miss him. You'd be sitting down for dinner and the phone would ring. And that was the time we had together. So Dad would get up, go out and answer the phone, then he'd have to nick out somewhere to go and see someone. And I hated the telephone for years, and I think it was because of that. I still associate it with it pulling me away from doing things I want to do and pulling him out of the family time together.
Your father was fairly senior in the church in Tasmania.
Yeah, in Tassie he was the moderator of Tasmania, which is a bit like, top dog. They have somebody that they answer to as a body. He was also, when he moved to Adelaide, he became moderator in South Australia, moderator in Victoria. When he moved to New South Wales, which was his last real posting before he retired, he was Moderator General of Australia, and that's like the Pope to the Catholic Church in the country, or the Archbishop or whatever. And with that came an awful lot of responsibility time-wise as well. And
so you would have seen even less of him.
Oh, hell yeah, yeah. But he was also a very educated man. Like, he was a teacher before he became a minister, and he spoke several languages. He was, because of the old Greek you have to learn, and Latin and all those sorts of things. So he was a very intelligent man. He had all these initials behind his name, uni degrees and all that sort of stuff. I don't know when he found time to do it, but he was a very, very smart man. So if I ever needed help with homework or anything, it was great, because Dad was the go-to. Mum couldn't add 2 and 2 together, really. She wasn't her thing, and I don't think she went very far at school because she was chronic asthmatic and there were other problems there, so I think she missed out a bit on her education. But Dad was, he was a clever boy, yeah.
What's your favourite memory of those times?
Well, it's hard to say. Most of my favourite memories are with my brother, because we spent so much time together, building cubbies and all that sort of stuff. I remember once we watched a movie together. Now, we didn't watch much TV in those days. It was very much monitored, how much we watched and when we watched it.
Frowned upon.
It wasn't on all the time. There was probably a time in the afternoon when we came home from school. We were always kicked outside, told to go and play. But I remember watching things like Bellbird, and I remember seeing Sesame Street when it first came on occasionally. The news, we always watched the news as a family. And then I had a couple of favourite programs I was allowed to watch. And Andrew and I, this time, I don't know why we were allowed to watch it, but it was a horror movie. And I remember us both sitting there clutching each other, absolutely terrified. And then I went upstairs to bed, and Andrew came up later. I decided to jump out when he came up the stairs, and I just remember him screaming the house down because I scared the hell out of him. But that's the sort of relationship we had, It was a lot of fun, very close.
A lot of fun, but also tragedy.
It was one Sunday, and I remember we all came home from church. We used to go to Sunday school and whatnot, and then go home. Dad was preaching, and Cecil, who was my middle brother, he didn't turn up this day, and we thought, he's probably gone walking somewhere. Cecil was one of those kids, he'd just go and walk and disappear for hours. And I remember one day he came back after a very long disappearance, and he'd actually walked from South Hobart over the Tasman Bridge, which is several kilometres, and back home again, just because he wanted to cross the bridge. So that's the sort of thing he did, and this day he just didn't come home. And in the afternoon, I remember Dad finally called the police, and they came to the door, and you could just tell from the look on their faces something wasn't right. Took Dad into the library. When he came out, he was as white as a sheet and called Mum in. I just remember hearing this wail, and we all just knew something was really wrong. And he'd been knocked over just up from the church. He'd been going home. Someone was backing into a petrol station and just didn't see the little tacker. It was just before his 7th birthday, and I was about 11 or 12. And I remember Andrew and I, again, my brother and I, sitting upstairs in Mum's bedroom underneath the window, just holding each other and just praying that God would bring him back. Just bring him back. Of course he didn't, but we just prayed and prayed for hours, prayed and cried that he would just make him come back, and it didn't happen. Dad actually had to preach that night. I don't know how he did it. I absolutely have no idea how he managed that. Never saw him cry about it. But I know they did that in private away from the children. Mum was a mess, of course. It took me a long time to understand why God would take someone like that. Why not a naughty person or a horrible person? Why?
Because he was a good young fella?
Oh, he's a great kid. Yeah, he was a great kid. And it took me years to understand that everybody just has their time, and that was his time, and he brought a lot of joy into our life. And my little brother, tiny little brother Robbie, was his spitting image. And I remember one day walking into the lounge room, and there was a song that Cecil used to play that was on an album that my auntie had given me. And he used to dance to it. It was really funny. And one day I heard this song playing, and I walked in, and there's Robbie sitting there dancing, and it was exactly the same sort of dance. And I just burst into tears. This was a couple of years later. So he was still there with us in Robbie, I think, a lot. Yeah.
It's an interesting thing you talk about how you had to tighten up your parental care with your daughter. But did your parents do the same after that?
Yes. I know you're not supposed to smack your kids and stuff, but Dad was a bit of a disciplinarian, could be. In those days it was considered okay. Don't ever remember being hit or anything out of anger. And I only really remember 3 or 4 times where I got the belt. And there was an occasion, again, with my naughty brother Andrew. We decided to go for a walk, and we disappeared all afternoon. We'd walked into town, and then all of a sudden it started to get dark, and we realised that we would probably get into a whole lot of trouble if we went home. So rather than go home, we hid. And we hid. Cat and Fiddle Arcade in the middle of town, and we just hid in this tree and didn't know what to do, and it got darker and darker, and finally we went out and sort of had a look up the road, and there's my father driving down the road looking for us. And he put us in the car, and I knew I was in trouble. I went straight to the bedroom and turned my electric blanket onto 3 so I wouldn't feel it so much. Yeah, and we both got smacked. Not because we disappeared, but because Mum was beside herself, and it must have been a horror for her having 2 other children disappear. It took me again a little while. When I was older, I totally understood. That was probably the last time I got the belt, So, and it was only one of 2 or 3 times that I can remember, and that was a fairly severe thing. And it taught me a lesson. I was never ever going to do that to Mum again. Yeah.
Because it wasn't the only tragedy.
No. We've sort of had of course I'm at the age now we've started losing parents, and I've lost my grandparents, and there's been a lot of cancer in our family, and my dad died from a brain tumour, and I've lost 2 grandparents through cancer. And my sister, unfortunately about 6-7 years ago, passed from a cancer in her abdomen. And that was hard. She didn't make her 50th, unfortunately, but she was a gorgeous person as well. But, again, we are finite beings, unfortunately, so it's going to happen.
With you losing your brother so early, how did that affect you, do you think, over time?
I tend to really treasure family. I also just, hyper careful, as I said, with my daughter, especially around traffic. You just value every moment you have with people. You don't know what's going to happen. It also came back, I was on a bus going to school with some friends, and one of these friends went to a different school. She'd just lost a brother, and I'd heard about it. He was over in Canada or somewhere and had a bike accident. And I was about 14 or 15 at the time, and I remember this girl, she wasn't a particularly close friend of mine, but she sat down next to me and she said, "I heard you lost your brother." And I don't know how she'd heard that because it was years before.
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, I did." And she said, "How did you handle it? When does the pain go away?" And I said, "It doesn't. It doesn't go away. You always miss them, and that's okay."
You still do?
Yeah. I still think of him a lot, especially birthdays, and on that particular date, March the 14th. I'll never forget that date. It's there. But I often wondered, like, when it would have been his 50th birthday, what he would have been like as a young man and then an older man. And I imagine he'd be a lot like my brother Robbie. Yeah. You never miss them, and that's okay. That's the other thing I've learned. It's okay to miss. It's okay to miss. doesn't really matter if it still hurts a bit. It's okay. You don't have to feel better, you know.
What's your feeling with the spiritual side of things? Did it open you up to that sort of thing, to where he might have gone, or what had happened to him once he'd passed over?
Yeah, I always fully believed he went to heaven and he's a little angel up there causing trouble. I am a believer in God. I don't go to church. I sort of gave church up a long time ago for various reasons, but believing in a supreme being is something I can't say I don't believe in it, because I just do. It's not for everybody, and I understand when other people don't. But for me, I've prayed too many prayers and had them directly answered to not believe in a higher power. And for me, he was a good kid. Why wouldn't he be in heaven, you know? He's a lovely little man up there, probably entertaining a lot of people.
You were mentioning a little while ago about theatre. Your father didn't make it to you being on stage. Tell us about those early days when you were getting on stage.
Okay, my first play, I remember my first school play was about grade 3 and was dressed up as a princess in a sari. It was something silly. We had an elephant and it was just nothing much. And then when I hit grade 6, we had to do a play for the parents. And it was Hansel and Gretel, I think. And I was playing the witch. I was about 11 years old, and I remember I'm coming down through the audience cackling in my biggest, greatest cackle. And this child started to cry. I felt an enormous sense of power. I was allowed to make children cry and I wasn't going to get into trouble for it. And I remember cackling and cackling and cackling and this kid crying, and it just felt amazing because he believed I was really a witch. And I think my love for theatre was born then. It was like, I want to do this. And when I was about 14, I went in another play. I joined a local theatre company and we did Calamity Jane. And so much fun. And singing and becoming a character, and with theatre you just don't know what's going to happen, and people can forget their lines and you just have to make them up. And when I got into pantomime, we'd have school kids coming in. We were doing Rumpelstiltskin. And this child jumped up in the middle of it and screamed, "I hate you, Rumpelstiltskin," you know, because the guy who was acting Rumpel was just so good that the kids believed him. And there was just an enormous sense of satisfaction, entertaining, and people just getting into it. I think you're out there doing what you love and people just really enjoy it. So it's nice to do stuff that people enjoy.
You did a fair bit of moving around at that stage. You were talking about that your father worked in a bunch of places. Where did you go to?
For me, born in Scottsdale in northern Tasmania, there for about 3 years, and then we went to Adelaide, and I remember coming back to Tassie when I was about 6. Then I was based in Hobart. Dad had about 12 years, I think, at St John's in Hobart, before he went to Melbourne, and then I stayed in Tassie. I didn't want to keep moving. So I stayed in Tassie. They went to Melbourne, Adelaide, then Sydney, and I stayed there till I was into my, actually it was early 32 I think I was. I had a phone call from a friend of mine who's a musician over in Europe.
We'll get to that in a minute,
okay.
But I want to talk about what you were doing in Tasmania at that time, when you were leaving school.
Yeah, school. I loved school in a lot of ways, but I couldn't wait to get out into the world, so I left after grade 11, got my first job in a kitchen, and yeah, did about 5 or 6 months of that, I think, or a year or something. And it was, I like work, but for me it just wasn't creative. It was getting up early, which I absolutely hate. So I started looking at trying to get into TV or into newspaper, or through the theatre I ended up meeting some people who said, yeah, there's an audition for somebody to do an off-camera part in a local TV show called The Secret Toy Shop, kids show. So I went along for the audition for an off-camera voice, and I ended up getting the part of the toy maker's assistant on camera. So that was my first sort of TV appearance, if you like. did that for a few months before the production closed down. And through that I met a sound technician who had a studio just behind the TV station. And he was looking for someone to run his studio because he was building radio stations at the time. Triple J and all those things were going in then.
Wow.
So he was actually building all those. So he needed someone to run the studio. So that was my foray into sound recording, and that was just a little 12-track studio, totally analogue.
Must have been big in those days, though, 12-track. Wow,
Was it reasonable size? Yeah. Big reel-to-reel that we worked with, and it was good fun. That, for me, was a creative outlet I'd been looking for, and we were doing mainly radio voiceovers and stuff like that. The occasional band came in. That was always fun to do something different. I think we did an audio book at one stage as well. And then from that, I met people back at Tas TV were looking for a promo producer. So that was Vision as well. I said, yeah, sure, I can do that. So they threw me in the deep end there, and I had to learn very quickly how to sort of work the Vision equipment as well. It was very simple, nothing like set up now, nothing like this digital stuff. It was all hand editing and everything. And I was making all the ads for TV and stuff, and that was brilliant. Again, it was very early mornings. I had to be there at 6 a.m, which I absolutely hated, but I could spend hours and hours in the editing suite and not be sick of it. So I wore myself out on that one. I really did 2 years of really, really long hours. And then I was singing at the time too. I'd been singing sort of in bands around town, and decided I might just go freelance with that. So I took a course with the Australian Film and Television School, and we made a film. That was the course, was making a film. I was production manager. And once I'd done that, again, I met some other people who were doing production, worked with some ad companies, and there was a group of women. There was about 5 of us. We worked quite closely together. Production manager, the makeup artist. I was doing mainly props and wardrobe and location hunting, that sort of stuff.
Did you have the desire to be in front of the camera?
Yeah, I was doing ads every now and then, and I did a couple of bits for local morning show, new products on the market or whatever, and every now and then something else had come back. I was on a feature film. I was an extra, kept popping up in all these scenes, but it never made the big screen, unfortunately. That was called The Departure. That was a bit of a flop. And I always wanted to do more, but it just never happened. My life kind of went in different directions.
Because I believe you auditioned for a newsreading role.
I did. And I tried to play the newsreader, and evidently it was a god-awful. It just didn't work.
Have you looked back at it? Have you still got a copy?
I don't dare. I never wanted to see it, because a friend of mine who was one of the producers came out, and I said, was that bad? And I said, okay, fine, it's okay. I don't know. It just wasn't me, I don't think either. I like to act, and I like to do stuff that really, and I think more the entertainment side of things rather than, yeah. I probably could have learnt to be a decent newsreader, but my heart wasn't really there. No. I might have been a better weather girl, I don't know.
Okay, let's get on to the entertainment. How did that sort of kick in then?
We'd always sung as a family. Dad used to pull us around the piano, and he taught us harmony, so we'd do 4 or 5 part harmony around the piano as kids, and we used to do a lot of concerts and things at church, and I was in the choir at church, I was in the choir at school, so singing was always something we were brought up with. My mum's a lovely soprano, Dad was a tenor and a choir master as well, so music was very strong in our family. And there was a year we went over to Scotland, when I was 14 to the age of 15, where Dad did his PhD in whatever he did it in. And I joined a band over there, and we used to play some funny little songs and go around the nursing homes, and I just loved it. We had a big double bass, and it was just great. And I always wanted to sing, and so one day I got a message from someone saying, Annie, do you want to work in a pub or something? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't really have any. I'd done some work with a Christian rock band for a couple of years, and that had gone really, really well, but I hadn't really thought about doing it as a job. And then when I got this call, they said, well, they're looking for someone to fill in for a singer. She's having an operation, she'll be off for about 5 weeks. So if you want to go to the audition, it's this Saturday at the local bar. And I thought, oh yeah. And I went down, I had a repertoire of about 3 songs that weren't Christian songs. And fortunately, all 3 were in her repertoire. And she was also had a deeper register. I'm an alto naturally, I'm not a soprano. And I think I got the part because her accompanist wouldn't have to transpose all the music to suit a higher voice.
Yeah.
So I think really that's why I probably got the job. So I had to lock myself away because I was starting like 10 days later. I had to have 20 or 30 songs up. So I just locked myself away and sang and sang and sang and learned and learned and learned. And then I started my first gig at Hadley's Hotel for 5 weeks and just absolutely loved it. I thought, yes, this is it. This is what I want to do. And from there I met other musos in town, and when I finished that I was asked to join a funk band which was working at the casino, so I did that for a few months. And then an old jazz player wanted someone to sing jazz. I didn't have any jazz songs, so I learned a jazz repertoire and worked with him on and off for a couple of years. And then there were trios, and there was a ladies group with 3 of us. And yeah, it just grew. I just sort of went from one accompanist to another and singing in all different combos, and it was a wonderful, wonderful time.
So where do we go from here?
It was funny because I've always wanted to travel. Since I lived that year in Scotland, I always wanted to go back overseas, but didn't think I'd ever make it.
Gave you the love of travel?
Oh, hell yeah, itchy feet. Itchy feet. I've never been able to stop the scratch. So the phone call came, I think it was about November, and it was a friend of mine that came down to Hobart occasionally to play. And when I'd finished a gig, I'd go over to the bar at the hotel casino over there.
So you're back in Australia at this stage?
Back in Australia, and I'm singing at the Birdcage occasionally with this guy, Jeff Healy. I used to call him Daggy. I was Duck Brain, he was Daggy for some reason. But Daggy gave me a call. He'd been overseas for about 7 months. He'd been to America. He was bored. He was going to London. He wanted to start singing again, but he didn't want to work on his own. So he said, Annie, can you come over and we'll try and find some work as a duet? And I just said yes. You know, I had a husband and daughter, and I didn't even think twice. I said yes. 2 days later, I had my passport application in. And
what did your husband and daughter say?
Oh, they were fine. I said, look, I'll go over. We'll see if we can get some work. And if we get some work, come over. If we can't get work, I'll just come home again. I'll call it a holiday. Yeah. And Danny was like, yeah, that's fine, that's fine. So... yeah, 3 months later I was on a plane on the way to London, and Daggy met me in London, and he'd organised somewhere to stay. He found a flat. We're going to base ourselves in this flat and then see what we could get. He'd lined up an agent to come and see us. So we had this gig in Mayfair in London. It was like one of these really posh club things. And, I mean, we hadn't even sung together for months. But it was a really, really nice mix of voices, and I knew his stuff pretty well, so... yeah, the agent was really happy and said, can you go to Belgium in 2 days' time? And we're like, yeah. So we were on a plane to Belgium 2 days later and did a month there in a little town called Tournai. And then,
I know it well.
Oh, yeah. No. Beautiful, beautiful spot. And then he flew us to Edinburgh, which was amazing because I love Scotland and I couldn't wait to get back there. And I had an old school friend, Gail, who I'd been keeping in touch with over the years. And we just took off where we left off. It was just amazing seeing her again. She hadn't changed at all. And we just absolutely had a ball there for the month. And then we were sent to Switzerland. No, not Switzerland. It was Spain. Meanwhile, Danny and Beck and Jeff's girlfriend had joined us, so we were sort of travelling together. And down in Spain, we ended up down there for 3 months, and it was beautiful. Little place called Puerto Banús, just out of Alicante. And it was a fantastic time, just seeing all these things. And Danny and Jen and Beck would travel together in the car, drive to the next place where we were. And, had an absolute ball. Loved it, loved it, loved it.
What was the highlight?
I think one of the funniest things that happened, it was definitely Puerto Banús for me. You look out in the harbour and there's just all these billion-dollar yachts and all sorts. It was the playground for the rich and famous. And one night we're playing this in a nightclub. I used to have a really long mic lead so that I could walk around and sing to people.
Oh, those were the days before the cordless mic.
Oh, hell yeah. Anyway, we had this guy sitting at the end of the piano and he had two pretty heavy-looking dudes on either side of him. And I went round to sing and they just closed ranks, shut me off completely, like could not go near this guy. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting, I wonder who he is. Found out later he was a Saudi prince, and definitely weren't allowed to go and approach him at all.
Yeah.
Yes. So I was like, okay, fine, whatever, you know. And he had one of the yachts in the harbour, and that it was just a beautiful, magical place to be. I loved it there. I could have lived there quite happily. There were lots of stray cats and things that we were feeding and looking after. I would have saved all of those. And but after that 3 months, Jen and Jeff came back. They were going to get married. And so we sort of went back to Edinburgh. We thought, why not just go back to Edinburgh? Got friends in Edinburgh. And we stayed with Gail and Jock for probably 2 months until we sorted ourselves out and got jobs. Yeah, and then I found out that I really wasn't meant to be a waitress. I went into a waitressing job. Danny had a IT sort of tech job that he picked up, teaching people about computers and things. And the restaurant was just, I loved the customer contact, but I just wasn't good with food. I kept spilling things.
Why weren't you singing at this stage?
I couldn't play, so I was without an accompanist. And I'm thinking, I didn't come here to do this, to be a waitress at £3 an hour.
What sort of money were you making in those days?
Looking back, it would be probably the equivalent of $300-500 a night. You know, you're doing 4 or 5 hours of singing. Yeah, £3 an hour was like nowhere near cutting it as far as I was concerned. Back then when we were, this is for piano bar people, when I started doing functions and events, it was a lot more than that. But yeah, generally about couple of grand a week, depending on the hotel and what their budget was like. But I decided I've got to learn to play. I've just got to do this. If I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it, and we might as well just go home. So I borrowed a keyboard from a friend, somebody I'd met over there, who was another singer from Australia. She lent me all her charts, so I copied all her charts. I could read charts because I used to play guitar. And just locked myself away for 2 months. And practice. It started off pretty horrible, plonky, just working everything out, and got to the point after about 5 weeks I got a phone call from an agent because I'd rung up a couple of agents and said, look, I'm going solo.
Because you had your name out there?
Yeah. I said, I'm going solo, I'll be ready in a couple of months, just to make myself do it. I wasn't expecting 5 weeks to get a call saying, can you do Christmas Eve at the Balmoral, which is a lovely 5-star hotel in the middle of Edinburgh. I'm like, yeah, of course I can.
Nothing like a little bit of pressure.
Oh, I'm thinking, holy hell, what am I going to do? And I thought, no, do it. You've got to do it. I had a sequencer, so I had some backing tracks that I could work with. So I just picked my best songs, focused on those for that week. When we turned up, I didn't even have a keyboard stand. I had an ironing board with the keyboard on top of it, and I had a bed sheet over it. I didn't have a stool, but I had a milk crate, basically, with the cushion on top, and that again covered in something so people couldn't see what it was. I did have a PA system, though. That was good. And my husband used to play guitar. So I think he played a bit of guitar that night. I can't remember if he played or not, or if it was just me. But yeah, I managed to bluff my way through this evening, and they must have liked it. They asked me back a week later to do New Year's Eve, so I knew I was going in the right direction. Still had an awful lot of work to do.
What was the thrill of playing to an audience that you found?
I love what it does to people. I love the effect. I know what it does to me when I hear somebody playing and singing. I love music. I can't not move when there's a band on. I can't not feel something when somebody sings a song. That it's just knowing that what you're doing is a lot affecting people. Sometimes people don't really hear it. It's all in the background. They're just yapping away. But there's a lot of people who listen and who are really entertained by it. They take something away from the evening. I remember a couple of times at the casino, when I came back to play at the casino in Hobart, there was a guy sitting at the piano, and he was an older guy, and he welled up. I was singing Someone to Watch Over Me. It's an old jazz standard. And his eyes welled up, and I'm thinking, I've hit a chord there. And when I finished my set, I went over to talk to him and asked him how he was. And I said, "You okay?" You know, and he was like, "Oh, that song." And I said, "Yes, I saw. What was with the song?" And he was like, "Oh, I lost my wife 2 months ago, and that was her favourite song." And I thought, wow, it moved somebody, and it moved me to hear that story. And there was another one a few weeks later. It's a young fellow who must have been 18, maybe 19, sitting at the bar literally weeping in his beer. I was singing Leaving on a Jet Plane, which is a really corny song, but he started crying.
Don't tell John Denver that.
Oh, John, sorry, John. But this kid starts to cry, and I'm like, this young man, you know. And again, after my break, I go up and I ask him, you know, "Are you okay? What's wrong? You look a bit upset there, mate." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm supposed to go to court tomorrow," he said, "and I'm skipping the state, and I'll probably never see my family again." And I'm like, holy hell.
Wow.
He was running away from the law, and that song made him think he was never going to see his family again. And all I could say was, "Look, darling, maybe it's better you stay and face the music, because you don't want to be running all your life. And your family's more important to you than what might happen, and it might not even happen, so think about that." And that's all I could say to him. And it was really, inside I was dying laughing in a lot of ways, because it was really quite funny. But it wasn't to him, it was very serious. But oh my, that sort of thing though, you don't know, I don't know about you, but certain songs take me back to a place.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. And that's what music is for me too. It's memories, it's all sorts of things. There's songs I can't sing because they bring back bad memories, you know. So
what song is the one that you don't sing?
there was a song called When Tomorrow Never Comes. It's a Garth Brooks song that Boyzone did a cover of. I was going through a marriage breakup when that song was on the radio, and I'd actually bought it for my husband to give to him. And he'd actually been listening to it and playing it to somebody else. And for 2 or 3 years after that, I couldn't even hear it. And the only way I can listen to it now is when I listen to the original version, the Garth Brooks version, because it doesn't sound the same as the Boys. I can't listen to the Boyzone version. It still just invokes a response in me, which is quite, I don't even care anymore about all that, but it just does. It just does. And The Way We Were is another one I find quite hard, because I had to sing that at a friend's mum's funeral, and she was like my second mum. So, word of advice to people out there: don't put your hand up for singing at funerals, especially if you know the people. It's horrible.
Yeah, just asked Elton John that. Though we did do a good job at Princess Di's funeral, I always thought.
Oh, heck yeah. That was great. Yeah, it's a difficult thing to do for anybody, but if you know somebody, I'd just, stay away if you can. I find it hard anyway. It just cracks me up.
So you've got yourself an agent. They're starting to show a bit more interest in you. What happened then?
I was given a gig for a month. This was shortly after Christmas, down at the Scandic Hotel at the Gatwick Airport. And the agent in London said, I'll come in and see you, and if I like what you do, I've got work for you. If not, you can go home. And I'm like, fine, that's fair enough.
No pressure?
No, none at all. So I had like 30 songs up by then, I think. And
how are you going with the piano?
I had to watch my fingers all the time, which used to drive me mad, because I had to watch, I'd be looking at the words and the music and my fingers, my head was doing this all night, bobbing up and down. And got to the point finally where I didn't have to look at my hands anymore, and that was great. And then got to the point where the music was only there as a reference, because I'd sung them so many times and played them, they became quite automatic. Getting to that point is just, it's months. But this first night, I said to my girlfriend, because he was her agent as well, what does this guy look like? Because when he walks in, I want to switch to my best songs, And she said, he's tall and he's dark and he's got these glasses, really thick-rimmed glasses, and he usually wears this long overcoat. Anyway, I'm playing away and this dude walks in. It was definitely him. So I just switched to my best songs, and he was only there for like half an hour or so. Then he came up and introduced himself, and I pretended I didn't know who he was. And and he said, that's fine, that's great, can you go to Germany next week or next month or whatever? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And that was it. Then I went to Germany, then I went to Dortmund, and then I went to Switzerland, and then I went back to Germany. And in between I'd go home for a month, like usually 2 months on the road, 1 month at home.
Where was home?
Home was Edinburgh. Yeah, we had a flat in Edinburgh. And my daughter was going to school there, and so we were quite settled there. Mind you, it was a very cold, wet sort of place.
Very cosmopolitan way for a child to grow up.
It was really good for her. I don't think she enjoyed it as much as she would now, because she had to leave her friends at an age where it was becoming important to her. And I remember when I was taken out of school at 14 and sent to Scotland, I wanted to stay in Hobart. I didn't want to travel. And she wasn't opposed to travel at 10 or 11, but for her, after a year or so, she was really missing Nanny and Poppy and the cousins and her friends, and after 2 years it was definitely time for her to go back home. But she did get to see an awful lot of Europe. She came back later as a 17-year-old and spent a year with me, and we sang together, which was really lovely. I thoroughly enjoyed that year.
So she's a singer as well?
Oh, beautiful voice. Yeah. And it was a really good education for her, because the kids in Scotland, let's just say they're a different ilk to nice little Hobart kids. Kids in Hobart are quite laid back and friendly, and kids in Scotland have a real edge to them. They're a lot more streetwise. She went from a school of maybe 20 students, to a class, or 15 students to a class, to a school where there'd be 30. Massive differences. It was the same for me. Huge cultural difference. And the kids were very, very different to what she was used to. So she had one incident where she came home. It was the first time she's ever back-chatted me. Came in the front door, and how are you, darling? She said, fine. And she slammed the door and walked into the bedroom. Now, we didn't talk to each other like that ever. It just wasn't our way. And she's a really sweet-natured child. So I'm like, what the hell? And I went into her bedroom and I said, what on earth is going on? We don't talk to each other like that. And she just burst into tears. And I'm like, what's wrong, sweetheart? She'd been walking to school. It was a winter's day. This old lady had slipped on the ice in front of her and basically hit her head and died on the footpath.
Really?
Beck had sat with that lady until help came. And then she went to school. She didn't come home. She went to school. She told some friends at school, and her friends at school told their friends, and some arsehole of a boy, excuse my language, came up and said to her, oh, you probably pushed her over. That's the sort of kids they were, though. She turned around and she hit him. My daughter never hit anybody in her whole life. She turned around and thumped him one. And then she spent the rest of the day feeling really guilty and really bad because she'd hit somebody. And when she told me she'd hit someone and what had happened, I was the baddest parent. I just said, well, he bloody deserved it, darling. No, we're not supposed to do that. It's not what we do, but I don't blame you.
Yeah.
I totally understand, and I think you can be forgiven for that.
How did she cope with that tragedy?
She was very sad for that woman for a long time. I don't think to this day she's forgotten it. But it's hard. It's a hard life for a little girl. And the fact that she went on to school and didn't come home just blew my mind. It was like, I would have gone home, but no. She tried to work her way through it, do the right thing, had to get to school and all that sort of thing. But, yeah, she's a sensitive little soul. And getting her home was almost a relief. I offered to have, because I had to go back without her and my ex, because he was my ex by then, and I wanted her to come back and go to international school. And she just didn't want to do it. She was like, no, Mum, I want to stay home. I want to stay home. So I had to go back after a couple of months on my own to Europe, and that was heartbreaking. Huge decision. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing. I think I did do the right thing in the end, but there were a lot of regrets. There was a hell of a lot of phone calls and letters, and she came over for holidays and I went over there for holidays, and we still got to spend a bit of time together, nowhere near as much as a mother wants to. But at the end of the day, it worked out You know?
Why? Why did it work out?
We're really, really super close. I didn't have any of those teenage tantrums or anything with her. She rang me up about absolutely everything. We've always been...
There was no internet in those days.
No. It was phone calls. It was phone calls and it was letters.
And expensive phone calls.
Very, very. And expensive flights, backwards and forwards. You know, virtually all holidays, every holiday. It was either I'm there or she's here, you know.
But things were starting to take off for you in Germany.
Yeah, I met a guy in Germany who was the marketing manager for BMW, and we ended up becoming involved. And through that, there was an awful lot of doors opened. And if nothing else really fantastic came out of that relationship, it was that he was a really good person for putting you in touch with other people. He knew every hotel in Germany probably because of his work.
He was a connector.
He was a real connector, and that was his skill too. And he was always doing that with lots of people. And so I was very blessed to have that at that point in my life. And as much as it didn't work out for many, many reasons that I don't want to go into, but there was an awful lot came out of that relationship, an awful lot to be thankful for. And one of them was just getting into this whole event sort of area with my work. I ended up singing at golf tournaments and horse race meetings and in the VIP tents and meeting an awful lot of really interesting people. And through that I got to work in a hotel chain called the Kempinski chain, which is a really lovely chain of hotels in Germany. Beautiful places to play. I was treated really, really well. And it was there that I met quite a famous German singer and ended up recording some songs with him, and then my career sort of went in another direction for a little while.
Tell us about this German singer.
Oh, his name's Matthias Reim, and Matthias was a bit like the John Farnham of Germany at that time. He just had a huge hit called Verdammt ich lieb dich, and he'd had a couple of albums. And
how are you with the language?
I studied German at school for about 4 or 5 years, but of course you never use it. So I had some words, basically, in basic sentences. When I knew I was going to go to Germany, I tried to use those tapes that you listen to. And I remember asking a question in German because I'd learnt it on my tape, and the answer I got back was nothing like the answer on the tape. So I didn't know what the guy said, basically. If he'd heard the tape and knew what I was waiting to hear, I would have understood it. So I just immersed myself in it. I read it, I watched German television, I tried to talk as much as I could, and within about 3 years I was reasonably fluent in German. And I find too with a musical ear you probably pick up stuff like languages a lot easier. I learned a fair bit of Spanish when I had 3 months in Spain, and I've been in French-speaking parts of Europe a few times, so I've got a lot of French vocabulary more, so I can't speak French very well, but I have vocab, so I understand a fair bit. Same with Dutch. I can read Dutch and understand a lot of it. But the German, because I was immersed in it and spent a lot of time in Germany, didn't take me long. And evidently I speak German without accent, which is quite funny, because when I went to school in Scotland and did German at school in Scotland, all the Scottish kids sounded like they were speaking some weird German. They all had Scottish accents and it was crazy. It was like the "Oh, I hör's nu," but in German, and very difficult to understand what they were saying. But people were saying to me, "Where are you from?" And I'd say, "Australia." "No, but where in Germany?" And I'm like, "No, I'm from Australia." "Oh, but you don't have an Australian accent." And I'm like, "Really?" "No." So, yeah, got on really well with the Germans because I could speak with them, and they didn't. Mind you, they all speak English anyway, but I much prefer to speak the language in the country I'm in. It's more fun.
The John Farnham of Germany. Wow, that's a big call. What happened?
It was huge. He came up to me at the piano. I didn't know who he was. I'd never heard of him or seen him.
That's always good for the ego.
Oh, no, it was funny. He was there with his wife and his crew. His band were there. They were flying out to the States the next morning, so they were staying at the hotel. This hotel was at the airport in Munich. And he came up and he said, "Oh, I've been looking for a female voice to record with. You interested in recording a duet?" And I'm like, Yeah, sure.
Didn't know who he was from a bar of soap.
I figured he must have been somebody because the bar staff kept fussing over this particular group, and I thought he must be someone. So I said so I gave him my number, and I went up. My husband was upstairs he was up there in the room. He was staying over that night, and I went up and said, "Do you know Matthias Reim?" And he went, "Yeah, of course I know Matthias Reim." And I went, who is he? And he said, just one of the biggest stars at the moment, blah, 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 blah. Why? And I said, he's just asked me to record a song with him. And he went, what? Of course you have to do this. You have to do this. So, a few weeks later I was on a plane out to Florida, and he had his recording studio at home there. And So
he was a German singer living in the States.
There's a big problem with promies over in Europe. They just get absolutely pommeled by media and fans and followed everywhere and rubbish printed about them, and they're incredibly intrusive. It's like what you see with the royal family. 99% of what they write isn't true. And it got to the point for him and his wife where they just couldn't handle the pressure and the attention, and for them to have any sort of normal life, they had to move.
It's interesting, though, that people seek fame, they seek that notoriety, and when they get it, they don't like it, they don't want it.
I think they don't mind it, but what they don't want is to have people taking photographs through their windows and sitting up in trees and with long-range lenses trying to get that shot that they can print. That's the intrusion. Every time we stopped at a petrol station when I was travelling with the band, people would just flock to Matthias. He's trying to have a cup of coffee, and he's got 1,000 pieces of paper in his face with pens, people wanting his signature.
It's hard to imagine.
It's awful. I had no idea it was that bad. I had no idea it was that bad. And it's weird because you kind of think fame's kind of cool. It's really hard. It's really hard. And it was stressing him so much. He was getting that tinnitus thing in his ears, and they just had to move. So they moved to Florida, and he set his studio up there, and he came back to Germany to release songs and to do his media stuff and to do his concerts, and then he'd go back home to where nobody knew him.
So we'd go to Germany to be seen.
Go to Germany to work and to be seen and do what he does. And
you talk about the German John Farnham. What was his voice like?
Very, very... It's one of those sort of husky voices. It's definitely not country or Schlager. It's sort of a mixture. It's a rocky sort of voice. He's on YouTube. A couple of the songs are on YouTube. I have to show you them later. But yeah, he had a great voice. I really loved it. It was easy to blend with. So
you landed on your feet.
I was laughing because I have all these male piano bar playing singers who are bloody good at what they do, and they all wanted that, and they never got it, and they're still over there doing it, going around the piano bars singing, and they're really, really good at what they do, a lot better than a lot of people on the radio. And they never got it. I wasn't even looking for it.
But that's like in Nashville. On every corner you've got someone that is absolutely outstanding, but it's the 1%.
Yep, absolutely.
Right place, right time.
Right place, right time. There's no other way to describe it. I was at the hotel, again, it was a Kempinski hotel. Was it Kempinski? No, it wasn't. It was another hotel chain in Hanover, the main airport in Germany, at Hanover. And again, I'm sitting playing away, having a nice time. Beautiful piano there. I love that piano there. Oh, Bosendorfer, I still remember it. And this group walked in and went up, sat in the corner. Again, you could see from the bar staff they must have been somebody. And the guy sat at the bar, one of them, he had long hair down to here, and I thought, he's got to be a rock and roller. With hair like that, you've got to have a guitar, you just don't walk around looking like that without a guitar. So in my break I went up and I sat down, and I'm like, hi, how you going? And he said, yeah, fine, really good. And I said, you guys musos? And he went, yeah, we've just come back from playing in somewhere or another. And I said, do you get a lot of work, And he went, he just looked at me and he went, yeah, we get a fair bit of work. Yeah, you might say that. And I'm thinking, hang on.
Who are you?
I could feel myself sinking deeper every time another word came out of my mouth. And
It's probably refreshing for them, the fact that you didn't know who they were.
they ended up becoming really good friends. It was so funny because I had no idea. And it was a little band called the Scorpions. I know.
That is hilarious.
I rang up a friend that night back in Australia who I knew would know them if anybody did.
Well, back in my radio day, I remember playing them when I
Yes.
was still spinning records.
I knew I was in real trouble when he said they'd had a big hit recently.
Winds of Change.
Yes, and he started to whistle that. Do-do-do-do-do. And I felt myself going red. I thought, oh, that's you. I've heard you on the radio. I didn't know what else to say. And then I rang up Trevor and I said, Trevor, have you heard of the Scorpions? And he said, oh, Annie, what planet do you come from? And I'm like, well, I didn't start listening to normal music until I was in my late teens. 'Cause we only played church music at home when I was growing up. I only had a couple of albums with normal songs on them. We didn't listen to normal radio. So I was a real late bloomer when it came to learning music. I started discovering all this stuff in my late teens and early 20s. I'd never heard of the Scorpions, and I hadn't heard of millions of bands, you know. I remember once we went on holidays at Christmas. We swapped houses with somebody in Stanley, I think it was, or Burnie, up on the northwest coast of Tasmania, and they had a Beatles album there. And Andrew and I, again, my brother and I, we were like, oh, wow, real music, you know. And we put this album on and we played it over and over, and I'd never heard anything so wonderful.
The Beatles, you're probably saying at that stage, these guys might make it.
Oh, it was Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I'll never forget that album. I knew every lyric of every song by the time we'd finished that holiday. And that was the most wonderful thing I'd ever heard, you know. So, and that was when I was about 12 or something. I didn't know bands like the Scorpions. Who the hell were they? But the drummer from the Scorpions, to get back to it, wanted to work with me, and then he started talking about the sort of clips he would make, film clips, you know, and he was just really sleazy. So I kind of backed off on right, and I just didn't trust him. And then one night at the hotel, he knocked on my door at 2:00 in the morning, and I ignored it, and then I had it written into my contract that the hotel staff were never to give out my room number to anybody. I didn't care who it was.
Wow, that's hard to imagine that you have to go to those depths.
I had
levels.
I had it written into my contract just because they weren't aware. They thought, oh, it's just him, you know, being Herman. We'll give the number to him. What harm can it do? But that's my sanctuary. Those doors close, so I don't want anybody in there, you know. So
What did your husband think?
I didn't tell him. I didn't want him to worry about what might happen to me when I was away. So, yeah, because he wasn't. He was back in Scotland then. So, yeah. But I had to be careful, of course, as a lone woman in a bar. Stuff like that happens. You get hit on all the time. You just had to deal with it. But, that one was a bit serious for me. Phone ringing too. People ringing me in my room was another one. Not unless they could go through the switchboard, but not straight to my room.
So you're on the precipice of fairly big things at this stage. A lot of people were after you. A lot of people wanted to know what you were about and what you were doing, and wanted to basically record and work with you. What happened?
I kind of chickened out a bit. Matthias and I did 2 more songs. One of them was very, very popular, and I'll never forget hearing it on the radio for the first time. I was actually driving down the Autobahn and nearly crashed the car. I was so excited. It actually went to number 1 in a little rural mountain town in Italy, in the Italian Alps.
Giddy up.
A friend of mine rang up and said, Annie, your song's on number 1. And I'm like, oh my God. And years later, I was cleaning out some stuff I'd left under Mum's house, and I found a piece of paper. It was things I wanted to do. I'd written it at school. And one of them was to have a number 1 hit. And I never believed for a second that I was even going to be a singer back then. And there it was, I'd done it, you know, tick. So that was quite funny. And the next song was Home, and that was one we did for, it was like a big TV telethon thing. It's about 8 million viewers or something they have for these things.
Wow.
And this song was the main song. It was sort of like the introductory song. It was the theme song for that program with Dieter Thomas Heck. And we did that every year for like 2 or 3 years. We sang that song at the beginning of this TV program, and at the end we closed it off. And that song did really well too, but all the money from that song went to charity. Like, we didn't keep any of that one.
Did you make much out of the other stuff that you did?
I think I made about $100 out of the first one, and the second one I never signed a contract. I didn't see a cent.
No.
Yeah. But hell, I had a lot of fun. So I got to fly all over the place and do lots of TV shows and stuff. So
Do you wish you had signed a contract?
I absolutely do, yeah. Because it's been re-released on compilation albums and stuff, and yeah, it pops up all over the place.
So who was the one that did the wrong thing by you, essentially?
Sony Music, basically, yeah. Well, Matthias probably should have had a contract written up for me, but Sony really should be taking care of that sort of stuff. And Matthias went through a bit of a hard time with his financial advisors and things, and he ended up in a bit of a mess, like with the people he was dealing with. So at that time too, I wasn't going to hassle him about it. It was like, hey, it brought up my profile. I was getting a lot of really nice gigs because of it, so it did pay in a way, absolutely. And yeah,
but it could be a nice passive income even today.
Oh, it would have been, I think, yeah.
Did you write much music?
I wrote one album. Again, I didn't have the right people around me to be recording. So if I'd had my own band or something, people I could have called on there. But because I was working solo most of the time, and I didn't want to take this stuff to Matthias's band, and it was just stuff.
Why is that?
I don't know. It wasn't their sort of stuff, if you know what I mean. And I just wrote a few songs and just recorded them myself and got them out on a CD and added a couple of duets that I'd recorded with a couple of my old mates back in Hobart. Back in Hobart. Because people always say, if you've got a CD, they wanted to buy something, take it home with them. So I did this CD. And it's really amateurish. Couple of the songs are really nice, but I just did them all on the piano and the sequencer. Sort of stuff you'd really need a band and work with a band to get them sounding really, really, really good. So I kind of still want to record. But
even now?
Yeah, but I'd do it very differently. I'd love to put down half a dozen songs just before it's too late.
What's different, the Annie that was hitting the high life essentially in those days and the Annie of today that settled in rural Queensland?
Annie didn't choose to leave the music scene. The music scene left her when she turned around 50. Piano bar scene in Australia is really bad. There's not much around, so it kind of died in the 80s and 90s.
And COVID?
No, COVID knocked us off our feet for about 8 months. When I came back to Australia, I based myself in Sydney for a while just to sort of sort my head out. My marriage had broken up. I'd been living in Singapore for a couple of years with my German husband. That all fell to pieces, so I came back to Australia. My daughter was in Sydney at NIDA at the time. So
a little bit of it rubbed off.
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah, damn good actress. So we set up home there in Beecroft in Sydney.
Lovely suburb.
Gorgeous. Jacarandas, oh my God, love it. And Beck ended up moving in with a boyfriend, and so I finally, for the first time in probably most of my adult life, was on my own. Didn't have anyone to look after. Just had to get my head sorted because I was a mess, an emotional mess. And I desperately needed to get back behind the piano. And I didn't have any gigs. So I was just sending out stuff here and there. And one place I've always wanted to work was Hayman Island. I had a picture on my wall of Hayman Island for years, and that picture went everywhere with me.
Before we go to Hayman Island, though, you've left us hanging with Herman and the Scorpions.
Oh, the Scorps, yeah.
So what happened then? You really must have been right at the pinnacle of what you were doing in Europe at that stage.
Yeah, I didn't trust that particular person to be the right person to work with me for many reasons. I was getting some vibes off him I wasn't really comfortable with. When things happened with Matza, they were duets, and Sony was interested, but again, with all this, what's the word? Just the media and the people. I loved doing the concerts with them and doing the shows, but it was just all that added attention and invasion of privacy.
So how bad did it get for you?
Well, for me, I started seeing cars driving past. We lived in a street that was in one and out the other in the middle of the country, so we didn't get any through traffic as such. It was only people living in the street drove down the street. It was a very short street, and all of a sudden there's all these people driving past and gawking at the house. And I'm thinking, oh, this is a bit strange. And then stopping and sort of getting out and looking like this, and I started to feel very uncomfortable with that. And my phone started to ring at home, and people either wouldn't answer or would say, oh, it's her. And I'd hang up, and I'm like, this is wrong. I don't want this. So I had to get a silent number, and I had to get a post office box, and had to start to protect my privacy a bit. And then I went to a film, what do they call it when you go to a film thing where they have a new film coming out?
Oh, an opening?
Yeah, one of those things, red carpet sort of thing. And Matthias and I were asked to go to that, so we went to that together. And hubby was with us as well, but he was kind of walking behind, staying in the background. And the premiere, that's the word I was looking for. And we're at this premiere, and this lady came up to me, she was some sort of reporter, and started asking me these weird questions about being on holidays in Spain. And I had actually been on holidays in Spain just recently with my husband and 4 other friends. We'd had a couple of weeks there. And she started to ask about Tenerife, and I'm like, no, I wasn't on Tenerife. I was on another island. Oh, and I've got some photos of this blonde person with Matthias in Tenerife. And I'm like, it wasn't me. I knew exactly who it was. It was his girlfriend at the time, Cordy. And he'd been keeping her very quiet. Because of all that attention. His marriage had split up in the meantime. And this lady was trying to suggest that it was me, and I said quite point blank, it was not me. My husband's just standing there. Do you want to ask him where I was 2 weeks ago? And Uva said, yeah, we were all on holiday somewhere else. She wrote the story anyway, suggesting it was me. I saw the photos, 100 yards on a galloping horse. It might have looked like me, but it wasn't me. My hair was down to here. This kid's hair was up to here. It clearly wasn't me. But despite that, my mother-in-law heard about it and thought it was me and rang me up to give me an earful. And I'm like, Mum, it wasn't me.
Don't believe everything you read in the magazines.
Absolutely not. And in those magazines, don't believe anything you read. And that really shook me. It was like, these people don't care about your private life. They don't care about what harm they can do to your relationships.
But from very early on in the theatre, you wanted to be known. And then all of a sudden, and we talked about this before, and you are known and you have a profile.
Yep.
And that's what comes with the territory.
Yeah. But it's still, I think you still have the right to privacy. And I still think you have a right to people being honest.
Should you have taken a leaf out of Matthias's book and maybe lived away from Europe and just travelled back for work?
Yeah, quite probably. Because in Singapore, I had no problems in Singapore. We moved there for 2 years, and I used to travel back to sing in Germany, backwards and forwards. And it all sort of went cool too, because Matthias changed record companies, and the new record company didn't want him doing the same stuff. They wanted him to move on to something a bit new. So he started singing with a couple of other people, which was absolutely fine by me because I'd had a really good run and I'd thoroughly enjoyed it. But that next step, I just wasn't feeling it was the right place and the right time with the right people. And so I just let it go.
Because you've got some people, as you say, there's piano bar singers all over the place that would have given their eye teeth.
Absolutely.
To be where you were, essentially.
Yeah. I was lucky, really, really lucky. And it opened a lot of doors, as I said, and it gave me an awful lot and some fantastic memories. So I'm thankful for that. But that was all I really wanted. I really still liked going back to my piano bar and sitting behind my piano and playing. That to me was the real thing. And I had a couple of stalkers in Germany. A couple of girls used to pop up at a lot of my gigs and they'd be staying at the hotel overnight. But they were really Matthias Rhyme fans, and they were just trying to get information out of me. So I cottoned onto that one pretty quick.
Oh, that is hilarious.
Yeah, it was funny. It was funny. But again, that sort of thing, it's just weird. I found it weird.
What did your husband think about all of this and all of this attention?
Oh, my German husband loved it because for him, Matthias was somebody he could use as well for his work.
Oh, because he was doing the PR with BMW.
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah, he was PR and marketing. So if he could put Matthias Reim in one of his race cars or sports cars or something, which he did actually, then it was good for him.
Who were the big names that you met at this time?
Well, I was on stage with, this is the other blowout for me, I was walking up the stage for the finale of one particular TV program we'd made, and I had Krista Berg behind me, I had Bonnie Tyler in front of me, the Boyzone over there, they were just starting out at the time, they were really young.
But all no names.
Oh, these people were just like Krista Berg behind me, and he yakking to me, like, it was amazing.
What were they like?
Really lovely, normal people, yeah. And then there are a lot of, like all the big German singers, we had Peter Maffay and all these people we wouldn't know over here, but over there they were the big names. And Mari Roos, and I was hanging with all these beautiful people.
Were you a big name over there?
People knew my name, yeah. I'd go to the supermarket and, Annie Moore, because I lived in a small town, so everyone in Tegenbach and Aal knew who I was, and it was really that was okay, that was fine, they were lovely. They'd known me for 2 or 3 years, so, but they were just happy for me, that was fine. But, I got recognised here and there, and I used to just scuttle away. If anyone was looking at me funny or pointing at me, I'd just sort of scuttle into a corner somewhere and hide.
I do find it quite fascinating that it's what you chased, and you wanted that number one, and you wanted that notoriety, but when it came knocking, it was something that you shied away from.
I wasn't comfortable with it, no. I was comfortable doing my job and singing and acting, playing, but not that attention.
Do you find most of those people that you were dealing with, the high-profile people, were not comfortable with it? A lot of them
find it very difficult to have a normal life, and a lot of them have to go away somewhere where they're not known to actually have a couple of weeks respite,
Are they just getting papped, though, constantly?
Yeah, they tend to stay in their own pack too. They have very rigid lives because of it, and I don't want that. Ever. I don't want people I don't know coming up and pretending they know me either. I want to have my friends and know that they're my friends because they're my friends, and not because they want to be close to someone who they perceive as being famous, That I'm not comfortable with that at all. I need to know who my friends are.
Who was your best friend over there?
Probably Uwe's got an old mate who's an Austrian, Karl-Heinz, and his wife is Renata, and they're both 5'0", and they're just gorgeous people. And we spend a lot of time with Karl-Heinz and Renata and another couple, Gert and Emmy. Gert died from cancer while I was over there. But the four of them, and we used to go on holidays together every year for a couple of weeks to Spain or a couple of weeks. I took them to Ireland for a couple of weeks, had a ball up there. And those were my go-to people. And my next-door neighbours were brilliant. They actually built the house that we were living in. It was sort of one of those townhouse things. And they were beautiful. He was the local carpenter. She just did odd work here and there. Their son, I saw him from the baby grow up. This is another thing that encouraged me to learn German. This little boy, Nico, when he was born, came home from hospital, couldn't speak a word of German. And by the age of 2.5, 3, he had more vocabulary than I had. And that really pissed me off. And that's why I said, come on, you got to work on this. So I started reading dictionaries and things as well, just to get a bit more vocab and really, really starting to broaden what I was saying. I thought, if that child can do it, I can do it. He's 3, he speaks better than I do. So you've got to do this. If you're going to live there, you've got to do it. So,
well, especially having a German husband.
Yeah.
That helps.
That helps a lot. He spoke a lot of English at home as well.
He could translate, though, for a lot of things when you're asking, what do you say in that particular instance?
I learnt the hard way. There's this thing in Germany where you don't... There's 2 ways of saying you. There's a very formal way, which is Sie, and there's a friendly, I know you way, which is du. And if I say du to somebody, it's usually because you know them. Now, the head of the racing club in Germany was a lovely man called Herr von Gärtner. And everybody said Sie to him, like used the formal you. Nobody was really friendly with him. I found that really unfriendly. And whenever I saw him, I'd say, "Hi, Herr von gerne, wie geht's du? How are you?" And everyone would go, "Oh," because I'd said "du" and
Cultural
not "sie."
differences?
I just pretended I didn't know any different.
And they let you get away with it?
Oh, he loved it. He loved it. He thought it was the most special thing in the world.
But that was also, was it because you were well known?
It was because I was Australian. I could get away with it. I mean, he knew I was doing stuff with Matthias as well, but I just tickled him that I was cheeky enough to do that. So, yeah, there were a lot of differences like that. I had to learn them. Of course, I wouldn't do that with everybody. But, yeah, I just refused to use the Z. I just didn't like it. I thought it was unfriendly. So,
Did they love the fact that you were Australian over there?
Everybody wants to go to Australia. Every German I know wants to go to Australia. Yeah, so it's just a place... all they think about is koalas and kangaroos and swimming and snorkeling, and yeah, it's a huge... They love people like when Steve Irwin first came on TV, everyone was telling me about this Steve Irwin. I didn't know who he was.
Line him up with the Scorpions.
Yeah. Everybody thought that that's what Australians were like. And I'm like, hell no. He's so over the top. But he was brilliant, in what he did.
Look, I remember I've interviewed him many, many times back in the day, and the cameras would stop rolling and he wouldn't.
He was the same.
He was exactly the same all of the time.
That's who he was, yeah. And that was genuine. I mean, at first you think, oh my goodness. But when you see him time and time again, you think, no, that's who he is. You can't fake that.
I think if he did try to do that, it would have shown through eventually.
Oh, yeah. Hell yeah.
Like it was just him, and it was, again, right place, right time.
Yeah, an incredible character. And the passion was just beautiful.
What about Crocodile Dundee?
Oh, hilarious.
But what did the Germans think of Crocodile Dundee?
I really don't know. That one didn't come up.
Okay.
No.
In America?
They would have loved it in America. Absolutely loved it in America. Americans just blown away by Australians, I think, because of the sense of humour.
The Germans that you actually got to speak to and got to interact with that had been to Australia, what was their thoughts? Were they disappointed that there weren't koalas and kangaroos in the main street, as many of them think?
No, I think what most Germans, I think, love about Australia is it's so big and expansive, and the beaches are beautiful, and the people are super friendly. Despite what the Germans do have a sense of humour, and a very good one. Some don't, but a lot of them do, and they're also very warm people. Especially, I find they get warmer the further south you go. I find they're a lot more relaxed, and once you get into Austria, they start to become really funny and cool sort of people down there. I love the Austrians. But the Germans, especially the northern, can be a little more uptight and a little more of the typical, what we say is the typical German. But they're just, they love the freedom and how comfortable it is in Australia and how friendly people are. People are just open and friendly here. And it is a big difference. The Swiss are even more uptight, I think, some Swiss than the Germans. They like everything to be done a certain way. If it's not done that way, it's like... And I was working at a place in Geneva, and it was a Harry's New York bar, and they hadn't had a female there before. They only used male piano players. So I was one of the first females to be working around these Harry New York bars. And this guy, Mr. Zucher, I'll never forget him. He was this little man, looked like a little pencil. And he was such a character because everything had to be done on time. Like you play for 3/4 of an hour, you have 15 minutes break. I don't work like that. I sit down, I start singing. Now, if I'm warm and I'm happy, I'll sing for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then I'll take a break. If the people are listening, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep going.
And they must have loved that.
Oh, they do. He didn't. He'd be standing there in the doorway tapping his watch with this horrified look on his face because I was breaking the rules. I wasn't doing it like he... And I'd have to go down and say... Calm down, Herr Zucher, it's okay, I'm okay, I don't need a break, it's all right, And he just couldn't understand it, but that was him, and that was very Swiss. They really do like order, whereas we're just a bit, we just wing it, really. Yeah.
I know, I've been termed while I was over in England, "Oh, you're so Australian."
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah.
Yeah. You can pick an Aussie overseas. I was in Turkey with my 4 friends that we used to travel together on holidays. We went to Turkey for 2 weeks. And we're sitting in this place, I think it was Cappadocia or somewhere, sitting in this big cave sort of restaurant. And it was huge, and there's different groups all through this cave. And there was a group way over the other side. And I looked over and I said, "They're Australian." And all these Germans sitting around me said, "How do you know that?" And I said, "Body language. I can see it." And they said, "Oh, you can't possibly tell." And I said, "I can. Watch me." And I got up and I went over and talked to them. Sure enough, they were from Australia.
What did you see?
Their gestures, the way they move, the way they were laughing, it was just, they were Australian.
They were relaxed?
Yeah, and I could just see it. They were Aussies through and through, and the Germans couldn't believe it. They thought it was miraculous. And I'm like, no, it's a body language thing.
Where did they think they were from?
Oh, they had no idea. Probably Spain or something. I don't know. It was
Other
bizarre.
than Australian, then, who are the most relaxed overseas?
Most chillaxed overseas, who might they be? I love the Spanish. Everything finishes at midday. They all go for a siesta. Everything can be done tomorrow, mañana, mañana, mañana. People say that all the time. They just flow through the day, you know, and get up and do it again late in the afternoon through to the night. And they're really hospitable people. And the Italians too. I love Italians, yeah. I'd live in Italy in a heartbeat.
The most uptight?
The Swiss.
Well, that kills the trip to Switzerland later this year. Now,
Sorry, guys.
you're looking to get back into singing once again before, as you say, the window closes.
Yeah.
When would the window close then?
The window is possibly closed, but I just don't want it to yet. Every now and then I get offered something like a fundraiser for breast cancer or something. They say, "Annie, do you mind doing a few songs?" This is in my little town of Widgie in rural Queensland. And I say, "Yeah, sure," you know. But I absolutely hanker to sit behind the piano, you know, 2 or 3 nights a week. But there's nothing here in town, so I just don't know where I'd do it.
What could you do? How could you relaunch your career, and would you go back to Europe?
Not now, no. I should have stayed going backwards and forwards. I'd still be working now, but shoulda, coulda, woulda. You know, I've met a guy when I came back home who I was never going to be in a relationship again. And here we are.
Famous last words.
17, 18 years later, you know, happy as a pig in mud. Learnt from 1 and 2. And
Don't we all?
Oh, it's been wonderful. And just to be in a relationship which is happy and we make each other laugh and it's kind and it's loving and there's no pressure and we support each other and we're having great fun. We make ice cream together. It's just good fun. But I still, we're thinking about maybe one day going back down South Hobart way because my mum isn't very well at the moment and she's getting old. She's in her 80s now and she's on her own, and I wouldn't even mind sort of rehearsing my butt off for a few weeks and then going down for a couple of months and just seeing if I could get into one of the old bars down there. I think there's still a lot of people there that were there 30 years, 40 years ago. Nobody moves down there very much, so I think I could probably get in somewhere, even if it was just for a couple of nights for fun. Yeah.
Do you have any regrets?
No. I wouldn't say regrets. I wonder sometimes where I would have been if I'd just gone back to Europe instead of coming home to Australia.
Why did you come back?
I think I really needed to. I'd been away for 10 years. I needed to spend time with my daughter. I was cut up emotionally. I couldn't see myself doing anything until I got myself healed, sort of thing. And I think if I'd gone back to Germany, I'd have been a bit lost. Like, I don't know where I would have lived, or I wouldn't have hung around Uwe's best mates over there. You know, I couldn't have done that. It wouldn't have been appropriate. It would have been too difficult, you know. So I wished I'd had an alternative maybe, but I didn't. So, and here we are, and I couldn't be happier. So I think if I'd maybe pursued a recording career, maybe.
What about now?
Oh, I like doing what I'm doing now.
But with the advent of modern technology, the home studio is bigger than it's ever been, and the
Yeah.
quality is amazing. Have you thought of putting some stuff together now and just seeing where it landed?
I have, but I wouldn't be looking. I don't really honestly believe at my age now and this stage in my career that I would have any sort of real impact on the people who are going to download those songs. I think if I'm going to do it, it'll be songs that I just always wanted to record and just for friends and family and whoever wants to listen to them.
What are the sort of songs that you've always wanted to record?
I'm a bit of a balladeer. I like ballads. I like music that moves me.
What's your favourite song?
I don't have one.
Okay, then.
I've got about 1,000 of them.
What would be the single on an album that you put out?
Okay. Probably there's a song called Sacrifice that Elton John did, and I just adore that song. Oh, there's so many I love.
Who's your favourite artist?
Oh, yeah. The artists that have had the most influence on me, there's a country song singer in US called Dan Fogelberg. No, he's not alive anymore. But
what a great singer.
I love Dan. That's when I fell in love with lyrics. I was listening to him.
Some of his stuff is awesome.
Absolutely beautiful. I love the writing of Bernie Taupin and Elton John. I just love that combination. So there's not an awful lot of songs there that I absolutely adore. There are so many influences. This is so many. I can't really pick a specific one. When I heard Whitney Houston's voice for the first time, I went, oh my God. You know, I heard Mariah Carey, but I quickly got sort of tired of that vocal gymnastics that she does, but she has an amazing range.
Was it 5 octaves or something?
Just ridiculous. Yeah. Absolutely ridiculous. And the first time I heard her, I went, holy hell, that can't be real, you know. It was just amazing. But Mariah Carey was just, one of those. But no, give me Whitney. Whitney was awesome. And
what a tragedy.
Oh, sad, 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 sad. And it unfortunately happens to an awful lot of people in that industry.
It's interesting too because let's talk about ABBA and all of these, or a lot of these celebrities, they give so much joy and so much sadness in their lives.
Yeah, yeah.
Why do you think? You've been right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Why do you think?
I think you said it there in the word give. It's the sort of job where you do give. And because you want to, not because necessarily anyone's taking. But I think too, when you're that big, what you do is their income as well. So for people like Matthias and people like ABBA, who are these huge stars, and it happened to Prince, and it's happened he had to change his name and not record for so many years, so that he could come back as the Prince he wanted to be and not what they wanted him to be. I think there's an awful lot of pressure, constant pressure on these people too, from fans and touring, and touring isn't as much fun as people think it is. You know, it can be nice seeing new places, but you're in weird beds. You don't have your own kitchen or your own pillow. You know, you don't have your loved ones with you all the time. So that can be really, really hard to do. And I think these people, just speaking from my experience, I just think you're always putting out. And when you're performing, it can be quite emotional as well. And there's not much getting back to you, especially if you're away from them. It's very hard on relationships. I found that out as well.
When you give like that, can it leave you quite empty?
I think it can. You can run out. Yeah, you can get to a point where you just go crash. And there's a lot of brilliant musicians who have just said, I don't want to do this anymore. You know, they think they've achieved what they can and that's it, walk away, done it, don't want to sing anymore. Somebody said that the other day and I was just astonished. It wasn't Billy Joel, it was somebody else like that. And he said, I've done all I wanted to do, so I'm not going to record any more songs. I'm like, what? How dare you? I'm not finished with you yet. And I think that's probably it. People aren't finished with them, but they're finished with what they're doing. Like, other people move around in their jobs and do different things, but musicians, and especially famous ones, tend to get stuck in that particular thing. And at some point, there's a burnout with some people.
Did you burn out?
I did.
You came back to Hayman Island. We did mention that a little while.
Oh, yeah.
So you're back in Sydney, and what happened then?
I'm staring at this picture on my wall, and I'm thinking, when I'm back in Australia, where do I want to live? It wasn't Sydney. I just wanted to be there to spend some time with my daughter. and to regroup. But then I thought, where do I really want to live? And I thought, well, I don't want to go back to Hobart, it's too cold. And it's all the same old scene, and I'd really want to try something else. Hayman to me was an impossible dream.
Because it must have been hard to come back to Australia after living the high life in Europe.
Yeah, although I've always loved coming home. I was doing it once or twice a year. Getting off the aeroplane in Sydney and smelling the gum trees is just the best smell in the world. Even though there's, aeroplane fumes around as well. It's just, there's something about being home. And it's such a beautiful place. And every time you go to the beach, you're not trying to share a square foot of sand with 30,000 other people. So I love coming home. And the lifestyle, it's like most of my time was spent in hotel rooms. A lot of it on my own in a hotel room. And they're nice hotels, but really, it gets a bit tiresome as well. And so, this picture went everywhere with me, and I had it on my wall in my office in Sydney.
That's the picture of Hayman Island.
Hayman Island. It was just there. It was that dream. And I thought, I really want to live in Queensland. I'd been to Queensland twice. I came over in 95 and did a couple of months at the Hyatt in Port Douglas. And then I was probably about 19 when I had my first trip to the Gold Coast, which I thought was just not my idea of a beach. Sun went down at 3 o'clock because of the high-rise buildings.
Yeah, very tacky.
So it was a bit of a shock to me. But I really enjoyed the birds and the fresh fruit juice and lots of things about it I loved, and it was all warm and it was gorgeous. And this is in winter in Tassie, it was freezing cold and it was still really nice and temperate. So I thought, I think I could do Queensland quite easily, and I found the people really laid back. So, that was my focus, and I thought, well, there's only one hotel there I really want to work at, so I sent my stuff off to them.
Which hotel was that?
Hayman Island. A resort, they have a piano bar there. So
what happened?
Oh, I got in touch with the F&B manager there, and he said, well, I can book you in November for 2 months. And I said, yep, you're on. So I packed up my house and put everything away and spent a couple of weeks with my daughter to get my voice back and to rehearse. And then I went up to Hayman, and it was amazing. It was just the most beautiful place I'd ever been in the whole wide world. And I was walking, the first night, I was actually walking from the hotel accommodation, staff accommodation, through the main kitchen, back of house, into the piano bar. And this man comes up and says, excuse me, can I help you? And I said, no, I'm right. And through I went, and he sort of followed me, and I'm like, who is this dude? And it was
another stalker.
It was the chief steward who was running the back of house, and he thought I was a guest that was lost. So he followed me just to make sure I got to where I was going. And then I sat down at the piano, and he was like, oh, it's the new singer. He'd heard about me in a meeting that day. And that is now the guy that I'm actually married to. So that was our first meeting on Hayman. And I had a couple of beautiful months there. Yeah. And it was just being back behind the piano, godsend. I just felt so calm and at peace, and it's all I wanted to do. And then after a couple of months, Leno had gone down to the Gold Coast. So I just went down there to meet him down there to see, where we might go. And haven't looked back. Got some gigs down there at, Hope Island. I was working at the Sanctuary Cove there for a while, and we had about 5 years on the Gold Coast, and then we went to Broome, did Cable Beach. Beautiful place in Broome. Broome is gorgeous.
It is lovely.
2 years there, though. The hot weather, the humidity, I started to get menopause. So... But then we got a call from Hayman, do you want to come back to Hayman? And it was like, hell yeah. So we just packed up and went back to Hayman, to where it all started, and had another just over 2 years on Hayman Island. Yeah, it's beautiful.
What's the highlight of your career?
Probably driving down the highway that day and hearing that song on the radio. I think there's no feeling like that in the world. And I've done a lot of stuff, but that was just amazing. And thinking that they thought that was good enough to put out there. And I'm looking around to see if anyone else is singing along to it. It was just amazing. And that, knowing that, I'd done something that was actually really acceptable, and people liked it and were buying it, and that was amazing. It was just brilliant. And just spending that amount of time with the band as well, having the band again, and just having a bunch of people who were just having a ball. It was probably the best 3 years of my life, I think, yeah.
These days you have a rural property and you care for a lot of animals.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
When I first came to Widgie, went to the bar the first Friday night, as you do, thought get to know some locals.
Yeah.
And, met a lovely bunch of people, and they invited us back to their place, so we went back to their place and got to know half a dozen of the people that lived nearby, and they just kept in touch. And we found out, when we bought the block of land, one thing I noticed coming into Widgie was all the signs, the koala signs everywhere. And I said to Leno, this has got to be a koala area. I wonder if we can get koalas on our block. So it's only an acre and a quarter, and most of the trees had been chopped down. But there were still half a dozen big trees standing. And Leno's mum came to visit before we built the house. I was saying to Linny on the way out, I said, I just really want to plant all these gum trees, find out which are the best trees for them to try and get some koalas in the yard. It'd be such, because I'd never seen one in the wild before. And we were standing, showing her where the house was going to go and stuff. And Leno says, look up, Annie. And I looked up and I'm like, oh. I just burst into tears. There's this dirty great big koala sitting up in the tree, just right above our heads. And I just cried. Like, oh my God, we've got koalas. So after that, we saw many koalas. And then I met with a lady. I rang up the Gympie Koala Action Group, or Koala Action Group Gympie, because I wanted to find out what sort of trees we should be planting on our property, what the food trees were. And this lady, Michelle, said to me that she was thinking of starting up or helping a koala action group to start up out there, and would I be interested? And I'm like, hell yeah, I'm in. And it was the same group of people that I'd met at the bar basically, plus a few others. So we all got together and had a meeting, and we started our Widgie Koala Action Group up, which is still running today. And it didn't take long before people got to know who we were, what we were doing. I get calls all the time, neighbours knocking on the door if there's a animal that's been run over in the street, or there's a sick-looking koala sitting at the bottom of a tree. They call me. The local wildlife group, Anara, the rescue group in Glastonbury here, they call me, Annie, there's been a sighting, can you go and check it out? And just started to get educated too, and did some workshops on looking after koalas, what to look for in sick koalas, not just koalas but other animals as well. And it's just kind of snowballed. It's grown and grown, and yeah, it's amazing. We just lost one actually about 3 weeks ago, little fella down the road. He didn't survive, but he was about 9 years old and was just getting old and didn't have any teeth and couldn't eat, and so they had to take him away. But it's been amazing. It's been amazing. I'd do it full time if I could, but I can't say.
Do you think you'll bring music back into your life? Is that on the cards?
Yeah, I looked at my keyboard the other day and my microphone, and I seriously considered packing it away forever. I looked at it and I looked at it, and I sat in there, and I just felt an enormous sense of loss looking at it all.
Why is that?
Because I'm not doing it, and I should be. And then I got in there and I cleaned up the room and I plugged everything back in. It's like, you've got to find time for this, but I have to find time for it, and I have to make it an absolute priority that at least for 1 to 2 hours a day I sit down and play, and then get some new material in, because I was going through my old stuff thinking, don't want to do that, and there's so many good songs out there. I have to update all my gear, get some, like, better, get educated, as you said, with equipment and stuff and modern technology. Move into the 20th century, Annie. Throw away the MIDI disc and all that sort of stuff, and go tech. And I'm not overly tech savvy, but I'm certainly not frightened of it. So we'll get there. But yeah, it's got to come back in. And even if it is only putting myself out there to do fundraisers and things and special things, even if it's just that and not necessarily a regular gig, as long as I'm ready, I can't wait. I did one a couple of weeks ago, and I just, again, it was just, you sit down and you just go, I'm home. And it's home.
Well, let's hope we hear your music once again. Annie Longmore, thanks for joining us over the bonnet.
Thank you, Mark, for having me.